right. Get ready, because we are going deep into Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed.
That's right, and we've got a lot to cover today.
You shared some excerpts from the book and some YouTube videos, so
Hmm.
let's get into it.
Yeah. Freire's work can be challenging, but
Yeah.
really rewarding to dig into.
For sure, for
Yeah.
sure. And I am all about a good challenge, especially with this stuff. This is about more than just classrooms, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Feel like it goes way beyond that and is relevant to all kinds of power dynamics.
Totally. And I think that's one of the things that makes Freire so compelling, right?
Yeah.
Well, he uses the term pedagogy, which the art and science of teaching.
Right.
His ideas apply far beyond formal education. He's really looking at the power dynamics that are inherent in any relationship where knowledge is being transmitted,
Right.
and how that can be used to either oppress or liberate.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, what is the core problem Freire is trying to solve here?
Yeah. So I think Freire would argue that human beings are fundamentally driven towards this idea of humanization, this process of becoming more, fully ourselves, reaching our potential.
Right.
But he observes that this drive is often blocked by oppressive systems,
Okay.
which he calls unjust orders. And this leads to dehumanization.
So it's not just like people being held back from, their full potential. It's like they're being actively pushed down.
Exactly. And one of the, I think, most insidious aspects of oppression, according to Freire, is that it harms both the oppressed and the oppressor. And that YouTube video you shared really highlighted this with that quote, dehumanization marks not only those whose humanity has been stolen,
Right.
but also, though in a different way, those who have stolen it. So it creates this sort of warped and unhealthy dynamic.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so then how does this unjust order actually play out in people's lives? How does the oppressor keep people down?
Well, I think Freire would say that a key part of it is this idea of internalized oppression.
Okay.
He argues that oppressed people often end up absorbing the oppressor's worldview.
Right.
And almost begin to believe the negative things being said about them.
It's like the oppressor's voice is
Right.
living rent-free in their heads.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like this constant internal critic.
Right.
And in the YouTube video transcript, they talk about how this internalized oppression can actually lead to a fear of freedom.
Oh, wow.
So that, even when presented with opportunities to change, they might hesitate.
Wow. Okay. So it's like they're not just trapped by external forces, but their own
Exactly.
beliefs.
Yeah.
Wow. What does that look like?
Well, the YouTube videos, they use this example of a peasant who believes they're inherently less intelligent than a landowner.
Okay. Yeah.
And so they kind of defer to their supposed superiority.
Right.
And I think it's a classic example of how this internalized oppression can manifest.
It's tragic because then it becomes a cycle, right? Where it's like, well, I should just stay quiet and let the people in power make decisions. But then that just reinforces that they have the power.
Exactly. And I think this ties into another really important concept from Freire, which is this critique of false generosity.
Oh, okay. See, now that's something I've seen in action, I think. But isn't any kind of help better than no help at all?
That's a common misconception. And I think that's exactly what Freire is challenging us to kind of examine here, right?
Okay.
So he argues that these acts of charity, while seemingly benevolent, can actually perpetuate oppression. It's, you might have heard this analogy like giving someone a fish every day without teaching them how to fish.
Right.
It creates a kind of dependency that maintains that power dynamic instead of addressing the root cause of the problem.
So it's not about the intention behind the action. It's about what impact does it actually have on
Exactly.
the power structure.
Exactly. And there's this great quote from the YouTube video. True generosity consists precisely in fighting to destroy the causes which nurse false charity.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's powerful. So then how do we move away from, this false generosity and towards, genuine change? What does Freire suggest?
Yeah, well, he introduces this idea of the revolutionary.
Okay.
And before you picture, someone throwing Molotov cocktails, let's be clear. The Freire isn't necessarily talking about violent uprisings here, right?
Okay.
For him, a revolutionary is anyone who's actively engaged in the struggle for liberation.
So it's more of a mindset than a specific action.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And this is where it gets even more interesting because, Freire he doesn't let those who are coming from the oppressor class
Right.
off the hook. He says that anyone who wants to join this struggle needs to be deeply aware of their own biases.
Right.
And genuinely trust the oppressed to kind of lead the way.
That's a big challenge, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's, I mean, it's hard to, like, first of all, like, even just acknowledge your own biases and then also step aside and let, someone who has been marginalized take the reins.
It's not easy, but it's essential.
Yeah.
And I think this leads us to probably one of the most important concepts from Freire, which is praxis.
Okay. Now, this is where I need some help. Praxis.
Yeah.
It's a little intimidating.
Yeah, no, it can sound kind of academic, right?
Yeah.
But essentially, it's this idea that true liberation requires both critical reflection and concrete action in the world.
Gotcha.
It's not enough to just think about oppression.
Right.
You have to actively work to dismantle it. But at the same time, you can't just blindly charge into action without reflecting on your goals, your methods, and the potential consequences, right?
Yeah.
So it's this constant kind of back and forth.
So like thinking and doing at the same time.
Exactly. Constantly refining.
Refining your approach based on what you're learning.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating is that Freire suggests that this praxis can begin even before a revolution, even within these oppressive systems, right? He differentiates between like systemic education, which can only be changed through systemic change, and then educational projects, which are like smaller scale efforts to raise critical consciousness.
So like planting seeds of change, even though the like full bloom of liberation might take a while?
Precisely.
Okay.
And I think one of the most powerful tools for nurturing these seeds, according to Freire, is dialogue.
Dialogue. I'm seeing like a theme here. What is so special about dialogue in this?
Yeah, well, Freire believed that genuine, respectful dialogue
is crucial for raising critical consciousness. It's about creating a space where people feel safe to share their experiences, challenge assumptions, and really like co-create knowledge together. And he contrasts this with, methods like propaganda or slogans.
Right.
Which he saw as attempts to impose ideas rather than foster genuine understanding.
I'm starting to see how this all comes together. It's like if internalized oppression is like having the oppressor's voice in your head.
Right.
Dialogue is how you start to push back against that voice.
Exactly, yeah.
And develop like your own critical thinking skills.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's through this process of dialogue, right?
Yeah.
Of really listening to and learning from each other that we can begin to, I think, dismantle these unjust orders that hold us back.
This is all really thought-provoking, but I have to say, like, I am feeling a little overwhelmed by all these ideas. What are some key takeaways? Like, we've covered a lot. What are some key things?
Yeah, for sure. I think, the first takeaway is that, Freire's work, while dealing with complex concepts, it really has, I think, practical implications for how we navigate power dynamics.
So it's not just like theoretical, it's something we can actually we can use this in our own lives.
Exactly. And I think another crucial takeaway is that liberation is it's an ongoing process, not a destination.
Okay.
It requires this constant, what we call praxis, that dynamic interplay between reflection and action.
So we're all on this journey together.
We are, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the beauty of it is that even small acts of resistance, small moments of critical reflection and courageous action can actually contribute to the larger project of creating a more just and equitable world.
Wow. Okay. Well, I am excited to keep going with this. But before we move on to part 2, I want to leave our listeners with a question. So think back to a time when you felt truly heard and understood in a conversation. How did that experience change your perspective or empower you to act? And we'll pick up on that thought in part 2.
Rise and shine.